Hi, this is Uncle Matt's D&D Studio. I'm Matt Finch, and if you play Dungeons & Dragons, and especially old school Dungeons & Dragons, please hit the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel, and now we'll move on to the video.
All right, so today in the studio I have one of the terrain rock stars of all time, who certainly a lot of people will already be familiar with, Bruce Hirst, who is the sculptor and the guy behind Hirst Arts, and we're going to talk a little bit about what Hirst Arts does, just in case we've got people who aren't familiar, and we'll go into that. So say hello to everybody, Bruce.
Hello, hello, hello.
So first off, what Hirst Arts does is they make molds for plaster or for resin, although resin will degrade your mold a little bit. But so tell us a little bit about the various things that you guys make, Bruce.
Okay, well, basically what we do is we make, let me grab this over here. We make silicone rubber molds. It's a real high quality silicone. And what you do is you pour plaster of Paris or dental stone into it. It's a powder you mix up with water that hardens in 25 minutes. You scrape off the top, and then what you do is you pop out these building blocks. And they're actually they're very detailed, very well textured, and they're very exact in size. So you can kind of see the flexibility of the mold by what I'm showing here, and you can kind of see how easy that they pop out of the mold. And basically what you're doing is you're making Legos that you never run out of, because you just continue to glue them together and create buildings and terrain for war games or whatever games you're happening, that you would like to make. If you want, let me see what's like I said, I mentioned dental stone is one of the things you can use. And I say plaster of Paris because a lot of people, I say dental stone and they go, what's that? They don't kind of get the handle on it. That's basically plaster of Paris, a powder that mixes with water and hardens in 25 minutes, but it's much stronger. And it's really not too hard to get a hold of. You can go to eBay and basically just type in dental stone, and there's 30 choices, and most of them are all good.
Now let me, and now a lot of people who watch have had me, hold up little pieces of things in front of the camera. So, for example, this is the kind of thing that you can do with the Hirst Arts, and anyone who's watched my online game has seen a lot of Hirst Arts. Although a lot of that's in the dungeon, a lot of it, and one of the things that modelers may not realize is that the precision of those measurements is actually incredibly important, because you can do a lot of stuff by just pouring plaster into an impressed clay mold. But if you expect that to fit with anything else in any way that looks nice, you're going to be spending a lot of time with sandpaper and X-Acto knife, whereas with the Hirst Arts pieces, it's a lot like working with Legos.
And for this, let me just kind of give a quick example. Like I said, most of you have probably already heard of us or seen us, but if you've heard the name, you're not really sure what it is and what we do, I'm going to move the camera around here just real quick. I'm going to just drop it over here. Here's an example of a dice tower, and this is mold from mate. Let's try that again. This one is made from mold number 344. And what it is this one mold makes this whole tower. So basically what you do is you pop out the blocks from them, and this has the texture that's already on it. And basically what you do is you use a glue like, Aleene's tacky glue or Elmer's wood glue, and you glue them together, and you pretty much create whatever you want. And I try to keep things really simple. Any of the projects on the website, I try to keep them simple so that you can kind of actually visualize yourself doing them fairly easy. This is not really a difficult process. I try to do all of the hard stuff for you. So all that you have to do is cast the blocks and glue them together. And even a mediocre paint job will still look pretty darn good.
And that's another thing to really point out, is that I mean, I don't mean to be given a big plug for a particular company, but I use a lot of Hirst Arts stuff, and that is absolutely the case. That if you are a crappy painter and you follow just one or two very, very easy techniques that happen to work well with it, you're going to get, you know, because of the texture and the stuff that's already built into the blocks, it naturally comes out looking correct, even if you screw it up to a certain degree.
And another thing that I probably want to mention is, you know, I didn't realize it until I looked back after a couple years. I've been doing this for 18 years. So I've got 142 different molds on the website, and it was hard to believe that I actually had that many. So sometimes most of these buildings are made for like 28 millimeter figures, which are Dungeons and Dragons size or Warhammer size, or most of the board games are that size. So what I tried to do is, if you go to the website under the molds available and you call up that web page, the color illustration on the right will take you to the instructions to build that project block by block. And if you click on the black and white illustration on the left, it will take you to a PDF file that you can print out. And these blocks are actual size, as if you laid them down on the table and are looking at them. So if you're wondering, it's like, you know, I've got a campaign and I want to make a room, but there's all these molds and I don't know what in the heck to pick for it. What you can do is you can print out from one mold. By the way, this mold that you see is mold number 70.
That's my one, yeah.
Yeah, and you look at mold number 70 and you can't tell what it is by looking at the mold, because it's hard to see in reverse. You know, so when you actually look at it, you can actually see the block's actual size with the detail and decide if that's something you want to buy. And another thing you can do is you can actually take your miniature and compare it to the arches that are on there and say, you know, that's a good size, or, you know, these windows are too small, or because I have a lot of people that have larger miniatures, or they use a different scale, or they're model railroaders, or they are other hobbies that they go, well, you know, I don't play Dungeons and Dragons. Can I use any of these? And so when they look at this photo, they go, oh, yeah, that brick sizes are just right. Or they go, man, these are gigantic blocks. Who in the world would build with something like that? You know, at least they can make a fair judgment if that's something they can really use or not before they, you know, put money into buying a mold.
And that particular mold is the one that I started out with. Browsing around through the pictures of the molds is real helpful too, because if you've got, you know, you may be saying to yourself, I'm going to do this big dungeon. There's actually a question of what should it look like? And so you've got, you know, one of the first things on Hirst Arts is the question of, do I want one that's got, you know, mortared large stones, or do I want one that's the field stone sort of put together? And you were showing the field stone mold, which is the one that I started out with. And in fact, I think that may be probably the most useful mold that you've got, was the one that you were showing with the different arch sizes and the field stone. But I don't know. I don't know about the relative.
The one that I'm, you know, kind of pointing the camera at now. This one is part of the field stone, and trying to hold this camera steady, you know, being a computer sort of camera is a little bit difficult. But this one, you know, the walls are field stone on here. And then I've got some different accessory molds that are used to make the little bits. The accessory molds are a little bit different, or a little bit more difficult to cast. You can use, you know, dental stone or resin on those, but there's a lot of fiddly bits. But just the walls and the arches and the stone, just for the basic outline or the outside of stuff, really works pretty well. And you never have to worry about running out of the blocks. You know, once you get the mold, I've had the mold so far for 18 years, and they're still going. You know, people are still using those original molds that I had made. And, you know, a lot of times what they'll do is people will, you know, you can find them on eBay, and they get about 80% or 70% of the price they originally paid when they bought them used. So, you know, that's kind of, you know, an encouraging way to look at it, I guess, because I just kind of recently created some molds for the Gloomhaven game. And, you know, it's kind of one of the recent ones that have come out from the Kickstarter. And I created a series of molds with hexagon bases to use for the Gloomhaven game. And these molds are huge. They're twice the size. They're like, you know, this big across. And, you know, of course, they're twice as expensive. But what people do is they buy the molds and they go ahead and make their board game, and then they sell them on eBay. And then somebody else gets them kind of for, they get back most of their money that they spent on the molds, and the next group pass them on, because then they'll build it and then they'll sell them again. And the molds, the silicone is really, really sturdy stuff. So, I mean, it will last through, several years of use.
Oh yeah, more than several years. I mean, I've got one that I managed to damage, but it was because of the way I stored it. And I've got two that are beginning to degrade at this point, but they are at least 10 years old, and have seen lots and lots of use. That's like my basic fieldstone set is just starting to get a little crunchy on the edges now. And I wouldn't even notice it except for the fact that I've got a more recent fieldstone mold and I can compare what's coming out of the two of them. And so that's, it's very, very durable. And I think anybody, I don't even think people really get sticker shock looking at these things, but there are tremendous value provided that you are craftsy enough to want to, continue, pouring molds and gluing things and painting stuff. But if you are, the value that you will get out of one of these molds is tremendous, because the plaster is cheap, the paint is cheap, everything else that flows from it, you can create tons and tons of stuff, and you recombine those molds too. I mean, you make something out of one of the molds and it'll work with pieces from other molds. You can do stuff like here's the rock slide, which people in my game are familiar with. That was how Rocky the Centipede almost died. And then, you can cast stuff directly into clay and end up with something like this. And this looks like a very irregular and imprecise piece. That's because this piece here in the center is irregular and imprecise. And then I put the blocks around it. Normally they line up perfectly, but I actually kind of like the look of this because it's got the rickety shape to it. So, I mean, there's just a tremendous amount of stuff that you can do with it. And I'm a big fan of Bruce, which is why I wanted to get him on here. Can you tell us a little bit about how do you make this stuff? I mean, do you sculpt? Do you start with sculpting the things, or?
Yeah, it depends. When I first started out making the blocks, I didn't know how to do it. You have to figure that out. There's no school that you go to that teaches you how to do that. For the actual sculpting of these, like the fieldstone molds and the fieldstone blocks, these right here, these are actually started out as cured polymer clay. So what I did is I take a slab of polymer clay and I would knead the clay. I would actually take a couple packages worth, like a pound of the polymer clay and knead it. And in college, I had taken a ceramics class, which they show you how to knead clay, like you throw on a pottery wheel. So you're able to find a way to knead it to get out the air bubbles, because air bubbles will really mess up the piece. You're cutting anyway. But what you do is I roll out this slab of polymer clay, a little over a ½ inch thick. And you can put guides on the side, so you can get the proper thickness on it. You bake it on a piece of glass for, I think 270 degrees is what they say, for 15 minutes per ½ inch thick. After you bake it, you let it cool. And then I've got a very precise saw with, certain tools that will actually carve blocks out of that hardened polymer clay. And it's like carving soap almost. It's once it's hardened, you can kind of chip it and work it and get textures that come out very similar to stone, because it acts like stone in miniature a little bit, but it's soft enough that you can put it through a saw. So it's interesting material that you can use that way. And then after you get one that's perfect in size, it's got to be square. It's got to be exactly the right height. It's got, everything has got to be right. And then you can sketch the stone design on it. And then I just used an X-Acto knife when I did these, and I carved it out. I sketched the design on it and carved it out and did it. And it took, a few tries before I was able to get the texture that I wanted. How deep do the cracks go? I mean, how much do this stone stick out? I mean, if you get too sharp of things happening on the stone, well, then you can't get it out of the mold. Or if you get it out of the mold, you get horrible air bubbles because you have little problems on getting this. You know, those are the things you learn when you create the piece, that other people are going to have to cast this thing. And if they do, well, it's got to come out of a mold for someone with, you know, a reasonable ability on pouring stuff. And you get better at it as you go. But every single project that I've done, like when I first did the Fieldstone, I didn't really think I could do the Fieldstone. In other words, it's supposed to be kind of a random stone is what this is supposed to look like. But, you know, it's like, well, it's in rows. If it's random stone, you wouldn't think that you could have, you know, a half-inch row, a half-inch row, a half-inch row. That would be, you know, it'd be pretty obvious that this is rows stacked. But if you do the texture in such a way that once you shine light on it, you really don't notice. You really don't notice that there are actual seams, because there's enough busyness to disguise the fact that you're actually just stacking blocks on top of each other. And that's the trick. And you never will know it until you actually sculpt the thing, make the mold of it, try it out and see, I had no idea that would work, you know, or it's like, oh man, that's awful. That certainly didn't work. You know, you just don't know until you actually go and put the work into it. But yeah, that's the process for this, is actually taking hardened polymer clay and sculpting it out. But I use a lot of different methods that I've had to figure out, because there's some things that you can't do that way. Nothing I do is done on a 3D printer. Nothing I've done, you know, is worked that way. It's all done the old-fashioned kind of old school way with the saws and jigs, and you can actually do a lot. My dad was actually a machinist, so I had taken a machine class or two. You know, they work with metal and they work on the lathe, and they've got, you know, but this is different, you know, because you can cheat when you do this, whereas you can't cheat when you do it in metal. This, you can actually take blocks of wax or blocks of plastic or polymer clay, and you can actually stick them onto something firm with double stick tape and run it through the saw. Well, you can't do that with steel, you know, it doesn't work, but you can cheat a lot when you do this, as long as you get the texture you want, and as long as it's perfect in measurement, and you can actually get it out of a mold, then there's a lot of things that you can do, but you've got to play with it. You know, you have to try to figure out what those tricks are. And every single new mold project I do, you know, I have to start from scratch each time, because I've never done this texture before. I don't know how to do it, you know, so it just takes a bit of work. And by the time I actually figure out how to do it, well, I'm on to the next project. I don't need that anymore. So,
because people can sort of follow you too on the website when you go from. I remember when all of a sudden you were really interested in science fiction, and all of a sudden there was the whole set of things on science fiction that started coming out.
Yeah, it just depends. You know, sometimes it depends on the game that we're playing, because most of this stuff has got a base on board games. Because, you know, that's kind of my thing. You know, you all are more of a Dungeons and Dragons group. I'm more of a board game group, and not especially deep, complex board games. In other words, you know, I made molds for a Robo Rally set. And the only reason I did that was because that we enjoy playing Robo Rally. And I thought, you know, I'm stuck with these boards. You know, wouldn't it be cool? It's like, well, I want, you know, to have a 3D board. I want them to actually go up levels and see it. You know, I want ramps to go up, so when you fall off, you feel the hurt of your robot actually, you know, kind of falling off the thing. And I wanted to be able to kind of rearrange the squares so that, you know, I want to do a board that's never been done before. I want to offer, you know, because a lot of people had come up with, there were 3 expansions to Robo Rally, and they had Armed and Dangerous, and they had one other one. And it's like, you know, other people had come up with a few of their own little traps and things that were in there. It's like, I want to do those too. So I worked those in there, and you can actually do anything you want and have this big, nice board. And then, you know, Wiz Wars was another one that I did.
One of my personal favorite games, by the way. And so I want to hear about the Wiz War boards.
But the Wiz War, you know, I would have set one, you know, I would have set it out if I had, known you were more interested in it, but, I do have it on the website, but I wanted a way to set it out so that, you have walls that you can kind of blow up. Right. And you have walls that you can make appear in the middle of nowhere. And you have, the different ones in Fantasy Flight Games had bought I don't know if they got a license to do it. I think Tom Jolly is the creator of that. But anyway, I just had to find a way that you could lay out these low walls fairly quick, and you can actually see it happen. And, of course, when you do it, the walls have got to be short. You can't have deep walls in there because you can't see the figures.
Right.
That's one thing. Like, Dwarvenforge, I think, has done a really good job. But some of those walls are a little high, and that's always a tricky balance to do, because if you get the walls too high, you get them high enough to really see the detail, and it really looks cool, but it's kind of difficult to play on. And if you get it too low, it's like, it's great. You can see everything. It looks good, but where's the detail? It's like you can't really feel like you're down deep into a dungeon when the walls aren't that high. So
yeah, that's the same. I usually play with walls that are only 1 inch high when I'm playing with a tactical D&D game. But then on the show that I'm doing, that's the online one where I'm running a camera through the whole thing. Here's the reason why I didn't hit Stefan up for some Dwarvenforge is that we're talking. This is what this is 4 inches high. On this dungeon wall, because the problem is that your camera is going to see way higher than you want it to. So you need some, you wouldn't even be able to see the minis at a table, but it's going through at a miniature's eye level through it. So, so for that one, that there are, depending on what the needs are, you end up, it's the flexibility of the stuff that I think is so great. But anything more on the WizWar? Boy, this is just my audience. I don't know if they know about WizWar at all. It's just I love WizWar. So any more about that one?
But the other thing was that you try to throw enough into the project, because not only did I have the building instructions for the WizWar's board, and when you're playing, usually there were 4 boards, and there was an expansion, I think, that you could actually play up to 6 people. I've got it to play up to 6 people, but when you do that, it's better to work in teams, because you have 3 teams of 2 people. That works out really nice, because you both can go at the same time, and it speeds the game up a little bit. And since you're working together, you're not going to kind of kill each other. But then it gave me a chance to do the other things, because they have like the the rose bush, and they've got the buck. You can't pass the buck because it's this big deer. So you get this big plastic deer you set in the dungeon, and you've got boulders, and you've got other things that I could put on my tips page, how to create these extra little bits for it, how you create these other 3D elements to go with it that really have nothing to do with the molds, but they're another fun part of the project.
Now, let me say something too about your tips page, because that isn't something that we've really talked about. But on your on the Hirst Arts website, there is a huge number of videos and guides that you've got for how to make this, that, or the other thing. And so that is also a really good resource starting point, I think, if somebody's thinking about evaluating what kind of dungeon terrain they might want to get or anything like that. Taking a look at that page is another good way of getting a sense of what you can do with these things, because like you said, at the creation process of the mold, you look at the mold, you can't really tell what it's going to look like until you demold it. That's the same for somebody who's going to buy them, that they look at the mold and don't really know what it is they could necessarily do with it. And that tips and tricks page that you've got really lets people see, oh, you know what, I could do this, and I could do this, and I could do that. So that's
the whole point, really. Whenever I do a project, I try to do it very thoroughly. Like when I did the cavern one, where you got the caves, and then I wanted the running water, the stream, to go through it. So not only do you cover how you lay out and how you can construct the basics behind, to make what room size any that you want, but it still all fits together, so you can do your own rooms. But how you do the water, how you do the complete project from beginning to end, and then the trick is to try to get folks to see it clearly enough that they go, yeah, I think I could do that. I think I could do that. And if they try it and they realize that, yeah, I can. Then they never really follow the instructions anymore. They go on with it. So I always try to keep the project simple. Like, for the, one mold will build like one project like the dice tower here. And I try to keep it simple so that once they do it, then they can feel like it's like, oh, I understand how that works. Well, I don't need to follow the plan. I already know what I want to do. And that's one thing that, when it comes to Dwarvenforge, they were actually here first. They were out. They produced theirs before I had mine. So I had, kind of seen some of what they had done. I had basically wanted to create scenes for the miniatures I was painting because I played Warhammer, Warhammer Fantasy a little bit, a lot of rules. Like I said, my gaming group they're more of a party gaming group a little bit, with, the dungeons and the like I said, the Wiz Wars and the Robo Rally. That's the kind of games that my group likes to do. I think I lost my train of thought there. But Dwarvenforge actually came out first. Oh, that's what it was. The painted the miniatures. Basically, when I started doing this, I wanted a way to display my miniatures. And I couldn't really find a good way to do that. In other words, I tried making stuff, printing on paper. I've tried, carving it out of foam. I did polymer clay, working with it and baking it. And I got one whole wall. And it's like, man, this takes too long. But, the basic was for me to create a shelf display so I could kind of display the things that I was painting. I had no intention of making a business out of it, And then after that point, so I came onto the idea of trying molds. The first one that I did was actually a retaining wall from a model railroad wall. It was just like an archway is what it was. And so I said, maybe I can use that texture. So I made a mold of it, cast a few of them, cut it down. And then it's like, well, I think I really need a different texture. How do I do that? So I started making different textures. And then the block idea came about. And then, from then on, it was just making something that I wanted for me that didn't exist before. That was it. It really wasn't intended to be a business. At the time, I was actually a high school teacher. I was teaching graphic arts, for the VOTEC high school juniors and seniors. And I was teaching, printing on the press. I was teaching screen printing, for T-shirts, sign cutting. I'm doing a little bit of web page design. This was 25 years ago. Okay. So I had a 10-year stretch of actually teaching that. And I started painting the miniatures while I was a teacher. And one of my students actually came up with a Hirst Arts name. I'm Mr. Hirst. I was the teacher, and so I was teaching graphic arts. So I said, put these on the website, because I was teaching them how to make a website. So I decided to make a website for these molds that I was doing on my own. And so, one of the students said, we'll just name it Hirst Arts. So okay, that makes sense. And so then that's how it came about. And a couple years after doing these, more ideas started popping up and more ideas started popping up. And I was eventually able to kind of retire from the teaching thing and, do this full time. My wife was still working as an RN. So, we still had enough income to keep it going. But once we got the credit card machine where I could do orders using a credit card, then it took off. I mean, it's like, holy cow, we were adding up the numbers one day and it's like, are you serious? I could actually not have to teach and then work on this? That's crazy, because this is just run out of our house. It's me and my wife. This is our whole business. It's just the two of us. That's it, and it's like looking back after 18 years, 142 molds later, I think I've got, about 70 different projects on the website. And it's all just been, me and Joanne every day, just working, sending out a few molds, making, and it's just been enough to, keep it going. It's crazy. You wouldn't think it would actually work, but, it beats working at Walmart or teaching, or I could always go back to teaching if I had to, but
Well, and let me say one thing. You said that each mold will work for one project, and so just to clarify that, what that means is that each mold is enough to complete a particular project. It is not limited to that project and that project alone. Once you've done your project, you then begin using your molds, and you collect bricks from lots of different molds, and you put them together into stuff that you make up. It's not like it's one mold per project. It's that there is a project that you can complete using just the one mold, and each mold is like that, basically.
Yeah, most of the molds, I would say, well over half of the molds, 70%, you can do a full project with one mold if you want. Now, these are all in, some of them, it takes multiple molds to do a project. In other words, like if I focus back on the end, this one over here is the walls are actually two different molds for the walls. One mold is the basic block mold, and the other one is the ruined fieldstone mold for the decorative arches and for the pillars and for other bits like that. But most of them are just, one mold will do a project, but they're all in 1/2 inch or 1/4 inch increments, so that any mold will fit with any other mold. They will all fit, and all the bits will be the same size to fit together. And, it's kind of funny that you can actually mix different things. People have mixed stuff that I have found it bizarre that they actually got it to mix, because some people will do, fieldstone walls and they'll corner them off with the Gothic corners or the chipstone corners. Like, does that work? It's like, well, they painted it up and it actually looks pretty good. Because if you think about it, what time era is this from? They didn't want to build a whole building again, so they just started building with what they had. And a lot of times the mismatching of things kind of gives it a little bit of an interest and an authenticity that you go, well, that actually works. It's surprising. So there's a lot of creative things that I would have never thought about doing, that a lot of the customers post on the message board or on the Facebook page or that sort of thing, it's just kind of enjoyable to just watch it go,
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot like Legos. You can do a huge, I've probably got 15 molds, something like that, and it's already pretty much at the infinity point where I could probably make them do anything that I wanted them to do. I mean, obviously you keep going back, because you're like, I could really use, this and such. I wonder if there's a mold on the site, that'll let me do this. And then you go in, you're like, oh, damn it, there's 3 that I need. And so then you end up, ordering. Actually, it's usually 4, because I think it's been twice that you and I have been on the phone and you've been like, well, do you want to get one more? Because then you get the discount. And I'm like, I have no idea what the other mold is that I need. So, so what now? So for this one, we could, if we wanted to, at this point, go on to the topic of assessing, because most of the people that I've got on the show, are pretty much using it for Dungeons and Dragons, and so
yes.
There are different needs for that sort of a game, and there are different terrain alternatives that people can use, and so we could go on and talk about those. Have you got the time to?
Yeah, I've got time. If you wanna keep it going, I'm still doing all right.
Okay, so I'm editing now, and that's the point that Bruce and I decided to cut the video into 2 parts, with the next one going on and talking about different terrain alternatives. So if you're interested in the idea of the terrain alternatives, please take a look at that video, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel.